Welcome, my friends. We will let folks make their way in from the waiting room and get started in just a minute. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you to those of you who are joining us live for today's Lunch and Learn, Building a Joyful, Welcoming, Powerful Climate Movement, Part 2. And thank you to everyone who is watching this recording on YouTube. Over the last 15 years, a movement has been building across the country that integrates creativity into the practices and policies of local and regional government as a game-changing tool. Maine has actually been leading the way at this work with Art at Work's 8-year residency in the Portland City Manager's office. Marty Pottenger is executive and artistic director of Art at Work, and we are delighted to welcome her back today to share how essential art is to creating a powerful climate movement that cannot be ignored. Marty, it is great to see you again. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to building a just and thriving future for all by acting on the climate crisis, protecting the environment, and safeguarding our democracy. MCA does that by helping to bring people and organizations together to educate, inspire, and advocate. And MCV by advocating for equitable policies, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. Since 2020, this weekly online Lunch and Learn series has helped us advance all of those goals, creating a shared space to explore our environmental and social history, policy priorities, climate action movement, and more. A few notes before we dive into today's program. We will hear from Marty first and then tackle your questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait, though. You can send those questions to me or to Maggie Summers through the chat whenever they occur to you, and we'll synthesize them and try to get to as many of them as possible following the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, Maggie is the one who can help you out, so just send her a message through the chat. As you know, we are recording this program and the video will be posted on our YouTube page later this afternoon. You can find recordings of all of our previous programs there, and there are a bunch of different playlists that can make it easy for you to focus in on particular topics. We are so happy to have you all with us today, and Marty, we are thrilled to have you with us, so I will turn it over to you to start things off.
Fabulous. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's great to be here again. I'm guessing that we have this, there we are. Let's start our time together with this beautiful blue slide and a question. What was one of your unforgettable art experiences? A lullaby when young, a poem, rap, or rhyme you know by heart? Maybe a film that changed how you see the world, or a play that changed how you see yourself? I invite you to take a moment and think of one and notice how it felt or how it feels inside you now before we begin our time today. Next. There is a river running deep within each of us, each of you here today, and me too. It is part of our operating system as humans. It's so essential, it probably should be added to the periodic table. And when it's engaged, we are able to create country songs and symphonies, finger paintings and frescoes, comic books and novels. But when we put creativity to work in addressing today's challenges, it can be a game changer. The kind of game changer we need to transform today's climate challenges into opportunities that deepen the well-being of all living things and the planet. Next. Over the last 15 years throughout the United States, as Kathleen mentioned, a movement has been building that integrates creativity into the strategies, policies, and practices of local, state, and regional governments and communities. In 2022, I was just at a White House National Endowment for the Arts Summit in DC at the end of last month. I learned this. President Biden in 2022 signed an executive order mandating that all federal agencies integrate creativity into their strategies, policies, and programs. And we're not talking simply murals and banners, as wonderful as they are. We're not talking simply puppets and songs, but civic engagement projects, civic performances, community collages that map and strengthen assets, and much, much more. Next. Thousands of communities and cities throughout the United States and the world, for that matter, are doing just that. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been supporting that work. Some projects focus on economic development, some on innovation, and others on creative placemaking or creative placekeeping. Those projects have transformed neighborhoods, parks, brought economic prosperity, revitalized downtowns, and reset a community's understanding of who they are. And they've also helped heal historic hurts, or at least started to mend or find justice-based solutions. The work we'll be focusing on today, there's our projects that tackle social issues, inequity, discrimination, partisanship, and distrust, the kinds of issues, as I said to someone at the City of Portland, an employee or neighborhood barbecue just can't fix. Next. And we can be proud in a very low-key Maine sort of way that here in Maine, we've led the nation through Art at Work's 8-year residency in Portland City Manager's office. Today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to take a quick look at some of Art at Work's projects in order to spark your imaginations and seed, hopefully, some ideas for projects that you'd like to make happen. Next. Before we dive into the projects, I wanted to give us a chance to consider some of the impacts I've observed over the last 30 years of doing this work. And whether the projects use poetry, performance, photography, stories, collages, singing, or drumming, these impacts were evident. And you'll notice each of them quite useful in the work of climate justice. And here's 5 of them. It taps into a valuable, flexible thinking. It increases our ability to hold contradictions. It definitely awakens a sense of possibility and hope. And it strengthens connection in part by melting isolation. And this is my favorite because we're going to need a lot of courage. It inspires the courage needed to take risks. Next. I find it helpful to read stuff sometimes and not just hear it. So I put this basic description of the work. It's a national initiative to increase innovation and strengthen municipal and community resilience through arts projects with municipal staff, unions, politicians, and residents. The 4 cities that I've gotten to work in, Art of Work has gotten to work in, is Portland, Holyoke, New York City, and Boston. And none of this has been possible without the help of Maine's robust and amazing arts and social justice communities and the City of Portland, Maine Arts Commission, the Humanities Council, and vital support from some of the foundations, including Sewell, Davis, Cohen, Maine Community Foundation, Onion Foundation, and individual donors. Cool, next. So here we are. I like to call it creative placemaking with people at the center. And this is a photograph of the man cage that these fellas, they're sandhogs, they're laborers building New York City's third water tunnel. It's as deep in the ground as the Chrysler building is high. Whoa. It's a 60-year-long project. And as soon as I heard about it, I was like, okay, water. Water's pretty essential. We're mostly water. 60 years, that would help solve problems in the education department if you plan something for 60 years instead of 2 years or 1 year or 4 years. And working class people are making it possible. And so right away, I wanted to do a performance. I felt like it would really be powerful for the city to get to have. So 3 years of a partnership with New York City's Department of Environmental Protection and the Sandhogs Union. It became an Obie winning one-woman performance written and performed by myself, of all people. And I wrote it from interviews with people building the tunnel and performed it all over the United States and Europe. I knew it could be a powerful frame for addressing climate, but also other social issues. It would be proof that we can and need to think big, and proof that we can work together, and it would lend all of us who use water in New York City and in our lives a deeper understanding of where the water we use every day comes from. And it would increase our clarity of the important work that governments do in keeping that water clean and in providing it and protecting it. You can learn a lot more on Art at Work's website, and you can also watch actually the show City Water Tunnel #3 on YouTube. Now, I mentioned this was called the man cage, and that's true. But if I happened to be on it, they called it the personnel hoist. Next. When I came to Portland in 2005, I didn't think I would be working with police officers. But when my research made it clear that the entire department was experiencing historic low morale, it was clear that succeed or fail, this was a key issue and needed to be an early first project for Art at Work. Because this was affecting not only the officers and their families, I'm sure, and it was also affecting the entire community, especially those more vulnerable to being targeted. It took over a year and 5 officers' bravery for them to agree to be paired with local poets and write poetry about their work and lives for a calendar. It took another 5 officers to volunteer to be paired with local photographers, which didn't require quite as much bravery. Next. As you could see in their intensity, the second year of Portland's police and poetry photography calendar had gained respect of the officers. Some of the outcomes were 83 Kellogg Foundation funded evaluation, and 83 of the officers reported increased morale. And the second year, instead of 5 officers volunteering to write poetry, 15 volunteered. And they also elected a new union president, which was really important. And here's I thought about not including this slide just because, we've only got so much time, but I did I'm trying to, inform and teach and inspire all of you. And so evaluation plays a really, in the work I do, a really key role for lots of reasons, but these are some evaluate-worthy impacts. The officers put pages from the calendar on their lockers at work and at home, and being a calendar, it was opened up at home. That was the intent. That's why it's a calendar, to be hung. And so then their lives, which usually they keep very separate from their home life, actually has some safe but meaningful integration. Officer Gail Petty organized a Portland Police Department exhibit for a first Friday of photographs, and over 250 people came. And we did I waited months to tell the police about the idea of something called poetry readings, and that was wise. But when we finally had one, months after the calendar was published and being sold in bookstores and around the country, we did a reading at Portland Public Library, and it was standing room only. And it was followed by 10 small groups with the paired poets and officers and photographers leading them. it changed the officers' lives in part because they just had no idea that people would be this interested. This was not anything that had been made evident in all their service. This project is called Public Works, and it was only possible with the partnership of several of Portland's municipal unions. The key issue was that several race-based discrimination lawsuits, that had been filed, they're obviously expensive to a workforce, to morale, to a sense of cooperative unity and also decency and justice. And it was also expensive to a community in countless ways. It was also expensive for the city to deal with through the legal system. I try to emphasize that this work actually is, to say the least, cost effective. And the design that we came up with was a series of story circles for public works staff, for the managers, construction workers, sanitation, clerical, and engineers, where they would reclaim and by telling stories with each other about their actual ethnic heritages rather than their whiteness. And so Italian, French, native, Greek, Russian, Irish, and so on. And the stories were fantastic. But the workshops, the design of public works included the remarkable artist, Daniel Minter, who's also a co-director of Indigo Arts Alliance here. He taught them how to make prints that showed, and they chose the images of their heritages and of their workplaces. And I chose that format because when some of us were young, we carved potatoes, halved potatoes and half baked potatoes, and carved them and used them as rubber stamps. And so I thought Public Works, that would be a good match, and it was. And these prints, they ended up with a kind of a rubber stamp dictionary. They used each other's and made these posters that were hung up in City Hall and throughout public works buildings and garages, which really got to continue the impact of this work. And some of you here today remember that in the summer of 2009, police officers killed an armed Sudanese man, David Okot. African-born youth saw it as murder. And over the next 2 weeks, there were over 15 clashes of youth throwing rocks and bottles at police. And then I got a call from then Police Chief James Craig asking if Art at Work would consider making a performance with police officers to do at the high schools. Now, I'll say this isn't PR work, right? That's not what Art at Work. We're definitely in the game to systemic change, to tackle tough issues. But so it was very important to me to reach out to the amazing organization, Maine Inside Out, which works with youth in the criminal justice system. And they agreed to create a performance that ended up being called The Weeping City. I'm going to just hop through this slide quick. 7 officers volunteered, 2 dropped out the day before first performance, and 5 stayed and performed, and these are the brave 5, and they did a remarkable job. You can also see this on YouTube. I'm pretty darn sure. These are the 9 youth, or some of the 9 youth, and they named their performance The Weeping City. And it was performed alongside the officers' play, which was called Radio Call. So 2 distinct original performances put together. They were called Forest City Times. And here we are over a picture from one of the high schools. Over 4 days, Forest City Times was performed for 1,500 students, faculty, and residents, and covered by local news media, which obviously got the word out to a wider audience. In the weeks following the performances, police officers who had nothing to do with the performances reported that they were experiencing an unprecedented positive youth-initiated engagement. So youth were coming up to them and knocking on their windows and coming up to them on the street and calling out to them. So it had a very powerful game-changing impact on those relationships. I wanted to share this picture with you for a couple reasons. Oh, thanks. I'm not saying next. Where are we? Oh yeah, here we are. Okay, we're in sync, Maggie. Thank you. Lovely. a part of the teaching part of all this, I wanted to stress the importance of collaborative creation process, of respecting the process and the product, of clearly identifying a key issue, of setting an ambitious goal, both artistically and in terms of social change and systemic change, and then the evaluation of driven outcomes. And hopefully some of us you'll be interested enough that we'll be in additional conversations and we can think more about how do you design evaluations that actually help drive the outcomes. But the smiles you see here in this picture didn't happen until the end of the fourth and last performance at Portland Public Library, right? And I found it a very positive fact that the young people up to that point did not at all feel the necessity of pretending that they trusted the officers during the rehearsals or the first three performances. The debriefing 3 weeks later was astonishing. I was astonished in both the officers' and students' reports of the impact of the project on them personally and on their communities. Next, please. Here's a favorite picture. Down by East Bayside, that wonderful mural that finally went to heaven or someplace. But here we are with then Mayor Nick Mavadonis, Ann Haskell, Mike Soschuk, police chief, myself, and that remarkable artist, Daniel Minter, that I mentioned. Next. So this was a big project, meeting place. And it was 4 neighborhood associations. And the intention was to increase the neighborhood resilience, relationships by arts projects, and diversity. So at that point, Portland had 14 neighborhood associations and very rare instances of, I'm just checking to see what my little notes are. Oh, okay. Very few instances of diversity, economic, mostly homeowners, if not entirely homeowners, not renters, and tenants, age, mostly folks in the same kind of 10 years, within 10 years of each other, and nationality, national origin, racial heritages, and all that stuff. So obviously, probably most of us on the call know that diversity is probably one of the most powerful game changers we have in terms of raising the likelihood that we're going to be able to make the kinds of changes that will help the earth and living things. And so that was the kind of key issue, was to do, and let's go to the next one. It was 1 year, so 12 workshops. And so times 4, because 4 neighborhood associations, 48 workshops. We used poetry, collage, choral singing, story, photography to create and deepen the skills and capacity and the culture of each neighborhood association, which were very different from each other, that would lead to more likelihood that they would diversify their net membership and increase the city's resilience. And this happens to be a photo. That's Tim Clorius, who did one of the 4 murals for East Bayside neighborhood. Some of you may remember, if you think back on the corner of Congress and Washington, there was this beautiful, made with blue tape, cut up tarp, blue mosaic woven into the wire fence. And this was at Anderson and Fox, where the Maine Museum community mosque is. And those were all part of East Bayside's project. Next. Okay. Listening. This is called Listening Wall. It was on Monument Square, May 1st, during the first Friday, and thousands of people came by and participated. It's a 30-foot long, 8-foot high chalkboard with cubbies. It's on hinges, so you could form these different listening cubbies. And USM graduate students in social work with the professor Paula Gerstenberger did the listening, and we did a whole course together, training and everything else. And then USM art department, Professor Michael Shaughnessy and his students built it. And as you can see, the pictures, we needed drones or something to make bigger pictures, but we're looking at a cubby and we're looking at some of the walls and some of the comments that people wrote, like just hundreds of passerbys wrote on it. And The idea is that listening is also an equal game changer in terms of the work that we all are doing. And it's a kind of listening that's not a conversation. It's an exchange of listening, but your mouth doesn't get involved if you're the listener, just your ears. And you're not giving advice, you're not solving problems, you're not sharing a story back from a story that reminded you that they said that kind of thing. You literally are offering your human attention. And we've all done it, usually in times of great import or sorrow or grief. And we know just be quiet and be with the person. And it's a powerful exchange. And it's very much a part of the work that Art at Work does. But it's what we brought it to everybody. And here, one of our final slides. This is another thing of the listening wall. This is two different pictures in case that's confusing. And we had a pop-up stage with those kind of prompts. And the whole listening wall was about homelessness and housing and gentrification, and hundreds of stories were gathered and experiences had. The listening exchanges that the social work students did were 10 minutes, but sometimes they went on longer. And people would sit in those cubbies. And then people used the pop-up stage, which I was very happy about and surprised. And Jim Devine, who some of you know, who's a part of Voices for Homeless Voices for Justice, came and sang some songs. So you could see there's lots of ways this can be applied. And I wanted to treat, well, next, please, treat us both or treat us all to this last, second to last slide. It says, meet Dan, then Sergeant Dan Hayden. And I met him at a roll call when I was getting to know the police before starting out on that project, poetry project. And at the end of the roll call, I worked in construction for 20 years, mostly in Manhattan. So I'm very well familiar and appreciative of working class men's humor. But the roll call ended, and I was nervous and sitting in the back in the last seat. And they said, Sergeant Hayden, I believe you're going to share a poem. And I was like, here it comes. And so Sergeant Dan Hayden goes up to the front and shared a poem that he'd written. The first and last verse were, the sky is blue, my cruiser is blue, my eyes are blue, my balls are blue. And the refrain is, my balls are blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue, my balls are blue. So and I loved it and did offer the idea that the chorus, the stanza the chorus could be worked on, could be more developed. And so what we're going to hear now is Sergeant Dan was one of the brave 5 officers who volunteered to write a poem for the calendar. And this is him reading it. It's about 1.5 minutes long.
I think we're missing the audio.
Let's start that over again.
Yes.
I think that's a Maggie solution.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Just 1 second.
What's a webinar without a technical challenge?
Exactly.
You know you're there if you have one. You know you've really been to something.
Share. Okay, and now let me know if this works.
All right, the poem's entitled Jenny and I. A complainant hears a scream, then silence. I speak to Mom in the kitchen. Nothing's going on. Jenny stands in her crib, brown curly hair, solid brown eyes, quiet. Dave carries Jenny to the kitchen, her cheek pressed to his shield. Look at this. 4 red lines blaze on her cheek and neck. We can see the handprint, only the thumb is missing. I look at Mom. Want to try again? She wouldn't stop. An ambulance ride, caseworkers from the state en route. In the ER, all gather around Jenny. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, child protective. Minutes pass by, then a gasp. Oh no, officer, come look. Bare skin on her back exposed. 4 curls of flesh like her wisps of hair. Raw, tender, a bloody bite. Mom has left her mark on Jenny. I look around the room. Tears spill from those gathered around her. Mom cries the most. As I lead her away, Jenny's eyes are brown, solid, no tears. My 18 years, wearing camo then blue. Her 18 months, wearing black and blue. Jenny and I have learned, we cry inside.
So I wanted to just say, I don't think we're going to get where we want to be without taking every human as precious and keeping our heart and our brains open to the stories. And the mother in that story's husband was serving in Afghanistan then and was just set to be, I think, returning soon. And that was a very important part of the story for me that we didn't put out there in terms of confidentiality, but it's a good example of what it is to kind of make sure you're looking, everyone's in that circle. So next and last slide, I wanted to thank each of you for coming and thank you for the work you're doing. If only for not screaming at other people unless you absolutely can't help it. And big thanks to Maine Conservation Voters for all that you do, and Maggie and Kathleen and all the folks. Here's our website, artatwork.us. If you go to projects, you'll see a lot more. I love the projects. I guess that's fair. And you can reach out, team at artatwork.us. Community projects like these, community arts projects, they thrive on challenging, fun, meaningful engagement, the kind that fosters equity and creates common ground. As hopefully was evident in our time together today so far, these projects are playing an increasingly powerful role in building the relationships and movement we need. And if you'd like to learn more about how essential art is to creating a powerful climate movement that cannot be ignored, here's our website, contact information, and we'd love to hear from you. So, woohoo, back to
Thank you
y'all.
so much, Marty. That was just that poem. I'm going to be thinking about that for quite a while. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And all of your work. And to pull the curtain back for everybody on the call, the timing of today's program was not an accident. Next week is the start of Cultural Heritage Week in Maine. And it kicks off on Tuesday with the second annual Cultural Advocacy Day at the State House. So what that means is that Tuesday afternoon, the Hall of Flags at the State House will be full of culture and creativity and connection and hope for Maine's best future, and someone you already know. Marty will be there delivering the keynote address. So we will share details about that event and registration info in the follow-up email this afternoon. I can't wait to, Maggie and I were talking this morning about our schedules and how we make sure we're there, because we can't miss that. We are going to get into some questions, and you can keep sending those to me through the chat. But Marty, we want to start by getting a little bit more of your origin story. How did you come to, I don't even know what the right word is. It's not use art, but something like deploy or leverage or what? How did you come to this work?
I like it. That's good. Deploy. What an interesting. So my earliest memory of realizing what was possible, and I got to tell the story in my TED Talk here in Maine, was a year and a half at the most. I could stand, and I had diapers on still, but my mom was in a super blue funk mood, and I grabbed a little yellow plastic woven, cheapy wastebasket, and put it on my head and did a little soft shoe, barefoot, soft shoe, and she stopped in her tracks and cracked up laughing. And I thought, whatever version of language I was using at that point, wow, this stuff is powerful, like really powerful. Like that was a night and day moment. And I think that stuck with me. So I, as a young person, organized plays in the neighborhood and went around and collected costumes, get a big cardboard box and knock on everybody's doors and ask them to give us stuff. And so, yeah, so there was something clear that something was happening. And the one other way I talk about it is I challenge anyone, and so far I've not been bested, to think of anything more painful than theater when it's not going well. I mean, not sex, not a film, not a lecture, not a sermon. There is a agony, I say, in your mind, you're scraping the blank wall for the switch and it's not there, you know? And so what that did was make me start performing again at 35. I realized something is engaged in live performance that is not engaged anywhere else. And that's the field, that's the landscape. I thought maybe we could actually do the kinds of big things that, you know, we almost have within reach. So
Thank you. That I am delighted to have that series of images in my mind. Thank you.
yeah,
When you mentioned President Biden's executive order
yeah,
about creativity in federal agency work, I did a little bit of quick Googling because I
good.
thought I gotta see what that says. And it is beautiful. So one of the things that it will include this link in the afternoon email as well, but so you can read the whole thing. But one of the things that that it says is, my administration's efforts to tackle the climate crisis will be bolstered through federal and societal support for an advancement of the arts, the humanities, museums, and library services. And it says very similar sentiments about safeguarding our democracy. And I'm curious what that looks like in person or in practice. Do you have examples that you can point to, or examples you want to see of what that looks like?
Well, we're all pretty curious. 500 of us from around the country were invited to DC, and it was just at the almost the last day in January, just last month, and we were all very curious. January, and it's starting. I got introduced to FEMA. A fellow works at FEMA who's, you know, they go, he gets it, you know. So okay, good. I don't think it'd be hard pressed to find an arts organization that is able to handle a federal contract. All that takes. Handling NEA grants is certainly challenging enough for those who've tried it and done it. So I suggested in the group meeting that we need clearinghouses. So that's one thing we can tell needs to happen. And then part of the idea is that there actually is money that artists could have a living, you know, and do that kind of good work. And so apparently Department of Transportation of all federal agencies is taking the lead so far. And I think, and I learned this in the city of Portland, you know, people just don't come to the hearings. They don't come to the, you know, we're going to have a planning session on doing this with the road or doing this with the roundabout, and so we call a hearing and the same 7 people show up and they all say the same things that they've said at all the other hearings that they've come to. And so how do you actually make it engaging in a very genuine and meaningful way? And so people actually leave with different thoughts and different connections and different ideas and a different understanding, right? And the city gets different input. So I think that's very much, I think, going to be part of this federal agency stuff. And then I've thought about, you know, those of us who live in Maine, we're seeing the unhoused population, and we're seeing the cities and the public works workers, we're seeing them engaging, and the police are clearing camps. And it's not, my interest is, well, of course, on what is the best way forward, but also how are these people getting help if they've gone and just cleared a camp? Where are they getting resources for themselves that they just, you know, took down everybody's home. And I think that a level of despair and disengagement in all these issues is also within view. And then one of the speakers at this summit was the Surgeon General, who said that obesity now is on par with smoking and some other terrible thing that we're all suffering. You all can remember, my mind's drawing a blank. But anyway, but he said that, loneliness, obesity, loneliness is on par with obesity and smoking for death, cause of death. And so for me, that's a soft but very vital issue that obviously anything that promotes connection with oneself and then with other people in a lasting and meaningful way is a huge value. So I see that happening.
I love that. And we just got a comment in the chat that this new funding source could be like the Works Progress Administration.
Yes, yes.
And I love that, we have seen the Climate Corps take off as a sort of revamping of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps of the Depression era. Let's do the Works Progress Administration too. And really both support our arts community, but also support our whole society.
Right.
I love that.
It would be a hell of a map of the US if you just could wave a wand and show all the things that happened out of that Works project. And all the trails we use and all of the buildings, just all that. It's breathtaking.
Marty, are there ambitious or even audacious projects in the works right now to join communities in the climate change movement?
Of course, of course, and I would say, the times and capacity are capacities making it challenging, and the times are making it necessary. And a couple people were saying to me, "Oh, what are you going to do, Marty, to make because I gave talks all over the country and met with cities all over the country during that time here in Portland with the city manager's office, and was laying out how we were doing it. And I learned an important lesson, which probably everyone else here already knew, which was everybody wants to do their own version. They don't want to partner with, anyway. So that's okay. So 1,000 flowers blooming, right? So that's what's gone and happened. But some people were like, how are you going to get municipal governments who are understandably and necessarily very risk averse to even get involved in this? And I said, oh, worry not. The times will make them desperate. And that's certainly where we've been headed. Is people are like, I have no way to solve this. I have no way to address this. Why not the heck try this? What have we got to lose at this point? So but the projects, Wishy. Maine Arts Commission and Art at Work are meeting with a possibly slightly longer range idea of a statewide creative placekeeping initiative with rural, tribal, and urban sites. And that's thrilling. That would be great. Especially with key issues where people at this cultural advocacy day that you mentioned, Kathleen, next Tuesday, the libraries are going to be there, the museums are going to be there, the symphonies and the arts community and the historical societies. The arts community is slot as 1 to 4. So I'm getting to give a very short, but hopefully meaningful keynote at 1 in the State House. And Dan Sipe from Lights Out Gallery up in Norway is doing the other keynote. And so we're going to have a sign up where individuals there, it'll be, residents and other cultural groups, but to list where they live and what's a key issue that is in their community. So we're going to get some really valuable information in terms of thinking about that. And then there's a show that's been long delayed, but it's called Maine, USA, all one word, and it's the history. Think of a big tent, everybody. Big circus tent. Think of it on in Bug Light Park. And it is a performance 100 community people and professional performers involved, and it's the history of Maine from the Ice Age till now. And it includes a full-size right whale puppet, and it includes dances with snow shovels and earmuffs and swimming suits, and a live band. And I just think it's got lots of things. It's about loving the earth and about deciding to do whatever it takes to deal with this stuff. And it's got a lot of main characters, 9 main Mainers, actual Mainers, some in heaven, some not. And they all play funny and sad and useful. Story shared. So that is missing $1.4 million. And
Okay, I was just gonna say, when do I get to
yeah,
see it?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I
yeah,
want
right?
to.
Just a million, which, it's so fun. I mean, it's like 10 years ago when I thought of it, it was like the sky, and now it's like, the hill. But we still don't have it. So that's out there. And
Is there a fund? We've got some folks in the room right now who say, how do I contribute to that?
right. Well, on our website, you can donate. We got an official donation page, so that's good. And certainly I'm sure you're welcome to give comments. So you could say Maine USA, Maine USA, Maine USA, but you could see it would be a real money. I just haven't figured it out. It would be I mean, for locals, there would be a real priority on having Mainers come, because it's going to reset the narrative back to when we first were with the people, with the indigenous folks, with the Wabanaki communities. And so that alone is so precious and powerful. And the Wabanaki community is involved in the show and creating it and making it happen. So yeah. So but then visitors would come, right? Go see this fabulous show with music and all that stuff. And so the idea conceptually was to make so much money that we could give it to environmental groups as part of our mission. And have a good time. And
We will keep everyone posted.
okay, great.
And we will all see each other there when this comes to
Great. Yes, we'll have a
pass.
special night for Maine conservation voters.
Exactly. So we'll share the Art at Work website, and people can get involved that way. But do you have any advice for folks who are thinking about how to get their own local community arts projects going?
Yeah, I do. I think passion is in first ingredient. You can be cranky. You don't have to be like super nice person. But passion, and you care, and pick a key issue and think who it affects. And then I would say go listen to people. I like to think of each stage of a work of any project, right? Whether it ends up happening or not happening, each stage has actually made a difference. So the card you design and mail to everyone is designed to have some sort of impact in the 6 seconds it takes them to read it and throw it in the wastebasket, right? And the same, so just getting to go around the city in the time I was in Portland and ask union folks and leaders and agencies and directors and the city manager what's going well and where could you use a hand, and listening, as I said, without interrupting or sharing my story. They say, oh, my uncle in Chicago. I don't tell them that that's actually where my family's from. I just listen, and people sniff it right away. They sniff that they are being listened to. And who here doesn't merit a good listen about your life? What's going well and where could you use a hand, right? And sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it brings up feelings for people and they cry, but crying, okay, cry, it doesn't hurt anybody. And it's probably part of our original operating equipment as well. And hopefully we're all getting good cries about, if we're that engaged, it's going to be challenging, right? And so, yeah. So I would say that listen to people, and people will express an interest, and just put it out there. Say, I'm interested in seeing if there's a version of art that might actually make a difference. You may know a poet, well, then start with them and do it that way. It took over a year for the police department to agree to write poetry for so many reasons. Oh my God. And they finally asked me do we have to at the final decision meeting? And I thought of saying yes. And I thought of issues around integrity. And I said no, but I think it would make it the biggest impact on what we're trying to do here. Because poetry is tough. Writing poetry hurts. It's not fun. It's delicious and it's intense and it's scary, just like being a police officer. And they got it and they said yes.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. Thank you, Marty. And I really appreciate that reminder that, so often when we're talking to people, we want to make the connection, right? Say, oh, Chicago, I've been to Chicago. I've
Yeah.
got family there. And that doesn't always make the connection stronger.
Right.
Do you have any other sort of active listening hacks that we should keep in mind when we start those
Well,
conversations?
yeah, a few hundred, but I always want to make it clear conversations are wonderful. Chit chats are sweet and they're good. And this is something different. And so when I do workshops, which I'd love to do with you all and ongoing, we do listing exchanges, and literally in 2 minutes each, listing exchange with the accepted guidelines. No interrupting, you're not giving advice, you're not going to refer to what they say. People start building muscle and clarity and start relying that it really is what we said it is, right? And so you really get to fall in love with people, and you get to, I don't know, you get to remember who you are too, which is, I think, half of what we're dealing with is just so much coming at us that it's hard to even, anchor yourself to yourself, right? And I was going to say one more thing. I mean, those are the guidelines that I use and that other people I've seen use and use well, is you do agree that you're not going to refer to it ever again, whatever they say. It works on kids. It works, it's hardest on people you live with, the other adults, very hard, very hard. Sometimes it helps to say, we're not talking about us. We're not using this to talk about each other just because, oh my God, but other than that, it can happen. When things in meetings is there's people who really feel such a desperation to be heard that they just can't read the room, and they speak early and often. And I consistently use listening exchanges when I'm leading and facilitating meetings and you wouldn't believe, it's like magic, that they have gotten to be listened to for 2 or 3 minutes, and that they've gotten to be listener to somebody else, respectful listener, for 2 or 3 minutes. It really helps people think more clearly about their participation in things in a way that it goes better for others. There's a saying, I mean, no one speaks, I don't remember, 3 times until everyone's spoken twice, or 3 times until everyone's spoken once. And, I tend to try to call on people who aren't speaking, and, I get yelled at for it, but yeah, yelled at, I've been yelled at my whole life. Good to.
You must be doing something right then,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I say if you're not being attacked as a leader, you might not be doing an effective job yet. It's a painful measure, but it's a real measure.
I love that. Oh my gosh. And Marty, I love that your observation about people being so hungry to be heard that they can't always read the room. And I'm thinking about that public hearing, dynamic that you described of people showing up and saying the same thing they've said it. We've all been in that meeting, right? Where you're like, wait, I've been here before.
Yeah.
How do we change that? I mean, we do this listening exchange. Is there something particular to the government and community meetings that needs a special approach to making it more accessible? When you walk into that hearing room, or is there?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that.
I think culture is a big deal, and I was really, what do you call it? Stumped with a neighborhood association culture. I really was stumped. And so I'm familiar with not knowing what to do is where I'm going with this. One time we did a small performance at, like, think of this, everybody. So you're at City Hall and it's time to, hear people get what, 2-3 minutes each? 1 minute now? Half 30 seconds. Think if you had ahead of time gathered a diverse group of opinions and you'd gotten to work with people and everyone had 3 minutes, but it was more a performance context, not in being like, whatever, and but it was on this topic and that started it out. So you bring in the power of theater and live performance and the possible pain, the horrible torture, to it. It just changes everything. I mean, we all know what it's like when theater is working, and it's like you just like, you're like alive, you're plugged in a way. And so to have that energy in the room, right? In City Hall, we got a room, we took over the room that at Portland that enters into the city chambers where all these meetings are happening and many hearings. And it was covered with the calendar posters and the signs of East Bayside's amazing sounds, beautiful murals, Jan Pirabeck, Kelly Rao, and it was just a celebratory, and you really got to read people's poetries. You got to see Dan Hayden, Sergeant Hayden's Blue Balls poem, and he read the story. You got to see those prints that the public works, workers did. And so I think that had to have an effect. I didn't interview people about it, but then, people step out and then they're surrounded by a real sign of who these city workers really are as people. And that right away is radical, right? And we had an opening, 250 people came and tried to fit in that one room, if all of you remember that room, right into city chambers. And we had a panel of the workers and their bosses and the agency head. And it was amazing because the people all had to hear each other, right? And the workers talked about what it's like to be yelled at and called shovel leaners, and just like the layers of disrespect that we understandably have. And it really changed things in a big time. And that was just one evening, right? That was like an hour and a half opening. So it's powerful stuff.
And we're all humans who want to connect to
Yes.
other humans.
Yeah.
Oh, Marty, thank you so much for being with us today, for pulling the curtain back on the incredible work you do, and for doing that work in community with all of us. I am full of ideas, and I've been
great.
so enjoying seeing everybody's smiles and nods and just feeling like we are connected right here, thanks to Art and to your work. And grateful to all of you for spending this hour with us. We will be back here next week. If Art connects us, it can only be second, or perhaps the thing that comes second to it is food. So that's what we're talking about next week.
That's good. I was going to say hors d'oeuvres. Yeah.
We'll be talking about what it would take for the 6 New England states to produce 30% of our food from regional farms and fisheries by 2030. Because that still sounds far off, I'll remind us 2030 is just a handful of years away. We will have Tanya Swain from the Maine Food Strategy Network and Leah Rovner from the New England Feeding New England Project. We hope you will be with us again next week. Until then, have a wonderful weekend, and go listen to each other, enjoy some art, change the world. We're grateful for all of you.
Thank you so much.